I still remember the last time I held my father's hand. His skin felt paper-thin, almost translucent under the harsh hospital lights. He had been fighting stage 4 pancreatic cancer for 8 months, and I could see he was losing the battle. But in those final weeks, something strange happened. A woman named Brenda started showing up, calling herself Dad's new friend. She seemed nice enough at first, and seeing Dad's smile made me push aside the nagging feeling that something was off. 3 weeks before he died, they got married. I was heartbroken but wanted to respect his final wishes. Then, right after the funeral, Brenda's mask came off. Before I tell you how this all unfolded, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever dealt with family drama after losing someone you love, hit that like button right now. And make sure to subscribe, because this story has a twist you absolutely will not see coming. Trust me, you will want to stick around until the end for this one. Let me take you back 10 months before my father passed away. I was 28 years old, living in Chicago, working as a junior architect at a firm I had dreamed of joining since college. Life felt stable, predictable even. Then I got the call that shattered everything. Dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to a year, maybe less. I quit my job the same day. There was no question about it. Dad raised me alone after Mom died when I was 12, and he sacrificed everything to give me a good life. Now it was my turn. Dad had built a successful small construction business back in our hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Heritage Construction had been his pride and joy for over 30 years. He employed about 15 people, most of whom had worked with him for decades. The business was solid, profitable, and deeply rooted in the community. Our family home was a beautiful 3-story colonial that Dad had renovated himself, filled with memories of Mom and childhood Christmases. During the second month of chemotherapy, Dad mentioned meeting someone at a support group for cancer patients. Her name was Brenda. She was 40 years old, divorced with 2 adult children. Dad described her as understanding someone who knew what he was going through because she was supposedly fighting breast cancer herself. When he first introduced us, I wanted to be happy for him. Brenda had shoulder-length auburn hair and wore elegant scarves that she claimed hid her hair loss from chemotherapy. She spoke softly, touched Dad's arm gently, and said all the right things about how brave he was. I noticed how she always seemed to steer conversations toward our family history, asking questions about the house, the business, and our financial situation in ways that felt casual but oddly persistent. By the 4th month, Brenda was spending more time at our house than at her own apartment. She would arrive in the morning with fresh flowers and homemade soup, playing the role of devoted caretaker. But I started noticing inconsistencies. She never seemed tired or weak like Dad did. Her skin glowed with health. She never mentioned doctor appointments or treatment schedules. One afternoon, I walked past the kitchen and overheard her on the phone. Her voice had lost its usual sweetness. She was saying something about how he was loaded and did not have much time left. My stomach dropped. When she saw me, she quickly switched topics and smiled brightly, but I knew what I had heard. That night, I confronted Dad in his bedroom. He was sitting up looking through old photo albums. I told him what I had overheard. I told him I had a bad feeling about Brenda. But Dad just shook his head slowly. He looked tired, so incredibly tired. He said she had been through a lot, and that I should not judge her so quickly. He asked me to give her a chance. I decided to dig deeper. I called the cancer center where Dad received treatment and asked if they ran support groups. They did not. I checked 3 other hospitals in the area. None of them had any record of Brenda attending their programs. She had lied about how they met. When I presented this information to Dad, I expected him to be shocked, angry even. Instead, he just patted my hand and said he knew. He knew she had not been entirely truthful, but he wanted companionship in his final months. He told me not to worry, that he had everything under control. I did not understand what he meant at the time. Then came the bombshell. It was month 8, and Dad's condition had deteriorated significantly. He could barely get out of bed most days. One morning, he called me into his room and told me he was going to marry Brenda. The wedding would happen within the week. I begged him to reconsider. I told him he barely knew her, that something felt wrong about the whole situation. But Dad was adamant. He said he did not have time to wait, that he wanted to die as her husband. Looking back, those words haunt me because they carried a meaning I did not grasp then. Dad's longtime lawyer, Harold, was a silver-haired man of 65 who had handled our family's legal matters for decades. He attended the wedding with a expression I could not quite read. Afterward, he pulled me aside in the hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he told me that Dad had been working on something important with him. He could not reveal details because of attorney-client privilege, but he urged me to trust my father's judgment. The wedding took place in Dad's hospital room with just a hospital chaplain, Harold, a nurse as witness, and me. Brenda wore a cream-colored dress and held a small bouquet. She cried during the vows, but I noticed her eyes were dry within seconds of saying "I do." The moment the chaplain pronounced them married, I saw something shift in Brenda's posture. She stood a little straighter, smiled a little wider. Over the next 3 weeks, Brenda's transformation was startling. The soft-spoken, gentle woman disappeared. She started making demands about Dad's medication schedule, dismissing nurses she did not like, and talking about future plans for the house and business as if Dad had already passed. She would catch herself sometimes and put the sweet act back on, but the mask kept slipping. Dad died on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was holding his hand. His breathing had grown shallow throughout the night, and as the sun rose over the parking lot outside his window, he squeezed my fingers one last time. His final words to me were, "Trust the process, son. I have taken care of everything." Then he was gone. I sat there crying, feeling like the floor had fallen out from under me. Brenda stood on the other side of the bed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but I swear I saw her glance at her watch. The funeral was held 4 days later at the church where my parents had gotten married. Over 200 people showed up, mostly Dad's employees, clients, and friends from the community. Everyone shared stories about his kindness, his integrity, his skill as a craftsman. Brenda played the grieving widow, perfectly accepting condolences with a trembling voice and sad smiles. The day after the funeral, everything changed. I was staying at the family home, sleeping in my old bedroom upstairs. At 8 in the morning, I heard voices downstairs. When I came down, Brenda was in the living room with her 2 adult children, Kyle and Amber. Kyle was about 30 tall, with thinning hair and a permanent sneer. Amber was 27, dressed in expensive clothes that looked new, and she was taking photographs of everything in the room with her phone. Brenda looked at me with cold eyes that bore no resemblance to the warm gaze she had shown Dad. She informed me that I needed to start packing my things. This was her house now. She was Dad's legal widow, which meant everything belonged to her under Pennsylvania law. I told her we should wait for the will reading before making any decisions. She laughed, actually laughed, and said she did not need a will. As the surviving spouse, she inherited everything automatically. Kyle stepped forward and suggested I make this easy on everyone. Amber kept photographing the antique furniture, the paintings Mom had collected, the hand-carved mantel Dad had installed. Over the next week, Brenda moved through the house like a conquering general surveying newly claimed territory. She brought in an appraiser to value the contents. She called Dad's business and informed the office manager that she was now the owner and CEO. She tried to access Dad's bank accounts, though the bank put a temporary hold pending probate proceedings. I felt sick watching her erase Dad's presence from his own home. She packed up his clothes and threw them in garbage bags. She took down family photos and replaced them with pictures of herself and her children. She even ripped up the small garden Mom had planted 20 years ago because she wanted to put in a deck. I knew I had to do something, but I felt paralyzed. The grief was overwhelming, and on top of that, I was watching this stranger steal my father's legacy. That is when I decided to fight back. I hired a private investigator named Marcus, a former police detective who came highly recommended. Within a week, Marcus uncovered information that made my blood run cold. Brenda had done this before. Twice. The first time was 6 years ago in Ohio. She had married a 75-year-old wealthy widower who owned a chain of hardware stores. They were married for 8 months before he died suddenly. The death was ruled natural causes, heart failure, but his children had tried to contest the will. They settled out of court, and Brenda walked away with nearly $500,000. The second time was 3 years ago in Virginia. She had begun dating a businessman in his 60s who had been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. but his family caught on to her scheme before she could marry him. They obtained a restraining order, and she left town quietly. Marcus also discovered that Brenda had never had cancer. The entire story was fabricated. She had researched support groups and cancer centers to make her lie convincing. She had even bought a wig to wear backward under her scarves to simulate hair loss. But the most damning information was about her debts. Brenda owed over $80,000 to various creditors, including some very dangerous people involved in illegal gambling operations. She needed money desperately, and Dad had been her target. Kyle and Amber were in on it. They had helped their mother research potential victims, set up chance encounters, and maintain the con. They were expecting to split the inheritance 3 ways. Armed with this information, I went back to the house to confront Brenda. It was early evening, and I found her sitting in Dad's favorite leather chair in his study going through his business documents. The sight of her there in his space touching his things ignited a fury in me I had never felt before. I threw the folder from Marcus onto the desk in front of her. Photographs spilled out showing her with the previous victim's court documents from the Ohio case, credit reports showing her massive debts. I told her I knew exactly who she was and what she had done. I expected fear, maybe panic. Instead, Brenda barely glanced at the papers. She leaned back in Dad's chair and smiled coldly. She asked me so what she had married my father legally. I could not prove she had done anything criminal. Under Pennsylvania law, surviving spouses inherit assets unless there is a will stating otherwise, and even then she could contest it. That was when Kyle and Amber walked into the study. Kyle positioned himself near the door, blocking my exit. He suggested I leave before things got ugly. Amber stood behind her mother's chair, arms crossed, looking smug. Brenda started listing everything she now owned. The house worth approximately $450,000. Dad's construction business valued at over $1.2 million. His investment accounts, retirement funds, and life insurance. She had already contacted her attorney and would be filing paperwork to take immediate control of everything. I had 48 hours to remove my personal belongings and vacate the premises. I felt like I was going to explode. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream to flip that desk over to make her pay for using my dying father. But then I remembered his last words. Trust the process. I have taken care of everything. Dad had known. Somehow he had known what Brenda was, and he had planned for this. I forced myself to stay calm. I told Brenda we would see what the lawyer had to say. Then I walked out, leaving her laughing behind me.